Matilda's army had been routed, Stephen was now free, and Robert of Gloucester was captured. But the war is ultimately not over, and a new generation of warriors will see Stephen come up against new generals and new armies. And the Siege of Wallingford is the culmination of just that. A few weeks ago we launched a week-by-week podcast on World War II, and it's still going strong. It actually launched in January. We have covered the battles such as Kark and Gold, Anzio and Soyan, and we've also covered wars such as the Italian invasions of Albania, the Germans' invasion of Czech Republic, Austria, and so on and so forth. So if you want to listen in on Tuesdays, go to Podbean, which will do a description in the description below. The capture of Robert of Gloucester was a major blow to the cause of Matilda, as the general had won previous battles for the Emperor and was ultimately the second in command. Among those to escape the battle was Robert's heroics, was Matilda herself, David I and his son Henry of Scotland, and Reginald of Scotland, who was actually a major commander. After the battle, both sides retreated back to their capitals. For Stephen, it was London, because Matilda hadn't actually lost the battle and hadn't actually besieged London at any time. And for Matilda, historians believe it was Lincoln, after the Battle of Lincoln, when Matilda had actually captured Stephen. 2 months after the battle, King David's son Henry, who had previously fought at the Battle of Winchester, rebelled against his father, fearing the wrath of Stephen if he became king after his father. Henry managed to persuade most of the lords in the area to come over to him, except a few in Skye and islands such as Man, who was under Scottish command at the time. This forced David to split up his forces, 12,000, of Matilda's former 30,000 strong army, leaving Matilda with just 18,000 against Stephen's 20,000. David rushed north and got there, but we'll cover that later in the episode. Meanwhile, in Normandy, Godfrey of Anjou, Matilda's husband, invaded Normandy, which was ultimately defended by Theobald, Stephen's brother. Godfrey took multiple cities, including important cities of Avranches and Vire, before settling into a stalemate at the Battle of St. Lô, less than 40 miles from Caen, the capital of Normandy. Previously, after Lincoln, Stephen had made Matilda heir to the throne, but unluckily for her, she was now pushed down to second, as previously in 1130, Stephen's wife Matilda of Blois had given birth to a son called Eustace. Eustace was now 11 years old, which was enough for him to become king when Stephen died. So Matilda was now second to the throne. Matilda though did have a hope, and as in 1133, she had given birth herself to a son called Henry. Matilda hadn't taken any more settlements since the rebellion in Scotland, and the failure to take Normandy had drained her forces, so she was unable to recruit forces. Luckily for her, the civil war in Wales ended in 1142, and the king, Owen Gwendal, sent 15,000 troops, the exact same amount as the troops which had been sent by David up to Scotland, led by the brother of the king Clador. Meanwhile, in the north of England, Prince Henry, who was invading England at the time, fought his father King David at the Battle of Carlisle. Unfortunately for the Scots, Stephen Henry was killed in the battle, but in a twist of fate, Henry's brother Simon de Slenes, French, Earl of Huntingdon in England, acted as Henry and commanded Henry's forces to victory, capturing King David in the process. Simon made David surrender his forces and end the war against King Stephen, and recognised Malcolm, Henry's son, as heir to the Scottish throne. Previously, David had vowed that he would make sure Henry or son of Henry wouldn't get the throne after his death. Now, Simon de Slenes managed to break this vow. The loss of Scotland as an ally and the defeat of Godfrey of Anjou, Matilda's wife, by Theobald, left Matilda in an untenable situation. So she decided to leave England, giving the territory she'd gained back to Stephen. It took several years for Matilda to recover from her loss in England, and unfortunately for her, in 1150 she fell ill. Henry, her son, now decided to step forward and invade England, which he did in 1153, with the aid of King Louis VII of France. The second invasion of England during the anarchy had begun, and Stephen wasn't even prepared. Luckily for Stephen, Theobald, who was Stephen's brother, had noticed the mass movement of troops and told Stephen. Stephen, in a panic, sent orders to his grown-up son, who was based in York, to meet up with him, which Eustace did in a similar time to that of Howard in 1066. By the way, they met up in London. Stephen had round about 30,000 troops under his command in the south alone, while Eustace had 20,000 troops. As a side note here, Henry had 20,000 troops under his command, while Lewis had just over 15,000, meaning that Stephen actually outnumbered Lewis and Henry. At the same time, Henry and Lewis had crossed the Channel with the men I've just mentioned a second ago, and now were marching on London, where on a hot day in June, they met with Stephen and Eustace at the Battle of Wallingford. Henry had 42,000 men. The right, left in a diamond formation and connected to the centre, but if Stephen tried to outflank the left, it would disconnect and move to defeat the outflanking unit. The units were made up of mostly of French cavalry, and some of it was made up of nobles who'd previously served under Henry's mother Matilda. Henry put Louis VII in charge of the left. The centre was all infantry, but Henry suspected that Stephen would have all his cavalry on the left. Henry thus commanded this grouping himself. The final grouping of troops was 6,000 men in the woods to Henry's right. We don't know who was actually in charge of the 6,000 men. The right was there, so if Henry found himself losing the battle, he would outflank Stephen that way. Now, on to the English forces, and Henry was certainly right about both things we mentioned above, of which he suspected. Stephen did have all his cavalry on the left, but also had 4,000 infantry there as well. The left was commanded by Stephen's son Eustace, who was a really good actual commander on that. Stephen commanded the right himself, and Henry was right that Stephen had all his remaining infantry there. Stephen ordered his troops not to move against Henry as he suspected an ambush, and he knew that the French were renowned for their outflanking movements. Unfortunately for Stephen, and we don't know the exact details as most of the historians disagree on it, but we know for certain and Earl, William of Malmesbury and the guest declaimer was Theobald, the son of Stephen's brother Henry, while Henry of Huntingdon claims it was William le Gros, the Earl of York, who charged with 2,000 of his men. I don't know exactly why the Duke Earl charged, but modern day historians have decided that it was probably to grab some glory, or that it was fed up with Stephen and the waiting. Stephen, now realising Henry could exploit this gap, ordered his men to charge at Henry, but aimed for the trees where he suspected the ambush would be, while Eustace was to back the Earl who charged up and attacked. The main battle in the centre was bloody and fierce, with at several points the battle swinging from one side to the other. But the end in the centre came when Eustace was killed, and Stephen's troops, which was fighting the ambush troops, got out, flanked and ran from the battlefield, with Stephen going back towards the centre.
No, you're supposed to have stopped.
Stephen? But I'm just
you
around.
said you were just recording it.
I am. And
so come away then.
It's got 4 seconds left. The Treaty of Wallingford was signed during the battlefield, ending the amnesty, Stephen making Henry a promise that he would become Stephen's new heir.
So you weren't being entirely honest with me.
The anarchy
was
from several conflicts that only came about because of the lots of disaster. In our next episode we will cover one of the wars, the Barons' War of 1212, which would ultimately culminate in the Magna Carta. The anarchy was one of several conflicts that only came about because of the White Ship disaster. And in our next episode we will cover the Barons' War of 1212 and the Magna Carta.
Yeah,
Okay.